Chapter 10. And when the queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to prove him with hard questions. And she came to Jerusalem with a very great train, with camels that bear spices, and very much gold and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart. And Solomon told her all her questions. There was not anything hid from the king, which he told her not. And when the queen of Sheba had seen all of Solomon's wisdom, and the house that he had built, and the meat of his table, and the sitting of his servants, and the attendance of his ministers, and their apparel, and his cupbearers, and his ascent by which he went up into the house unto the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her. And she said to the king, It was a true report that I heard in mine own land of thy acts and of thy wisdom. Howbeit, I believed not the words until I came, and mine eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard. Happy are thy men, happy are these thy servants, which stand continually before thee, and that hear thy wisdom. Blessed be the Lord thy God, which delighteth in thee, to set thee on the throne of Israel, because the Lord loved Israel forever. Therefore made he thee king to do judgment and justice. And she gave the king 120 talents of gold, and of spices a very great store, and precious stones. There came no more such abundance of spices as these which the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. And the navy also of Hiram that brought gold from Ophir, brought in from Ophir great plenty of almug trees, and precious stones. And the king made of the almug trees pillars for the house of the Lord, and for the king's house, harps also, and psalteries for singers. There came no such almug trees, nor were seen unto this day. And King Solomon gave unto the queen of Sheba all her desire, whatsoever she asked, beside that which Solomon gave her of his royal bounty. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents. Besides that he had of the merchantmen, and of the traffic of spice merchants, and of all the kings of Arabia, and of the governors of the country. And King Solomon made 200 targets of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went to one target. And he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 pounds of gold went to one shield. And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory, and overlaid it with the best gold. The throne had 6 steps, and the top of the throne was round behind. And there were stays on either side on the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the stays. And 12 lions stood there on the one side and on the other upon the 6 steps. There was not the like made in any kingdom. And all Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. It was nothing accounted in the days of Solomon. For the king had at sea a navy of Tarshish with the navy of Hiram. Once in 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory and apes and peacocks. So King Solomon exceeded all the kings of the earth for riches and for wisdom. And all the earth sought to Solomon to hear his wisdom which God put in his heart. And they brought every man his present, vessels of silver and vessels of gold, and garments and armor and spices, horses and mules, a rate year by year. And Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen, and he had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he bestowed in the cities for chariots, and with the king at Jerusalem. And the king made silver to be in Jerusalem as stones, and cedars made he as the sycamore trees that are in the vale, for abundance. And Solomon had horses brought out of Egypt, and linen yarn. The king's merchants received the linen yarn at a price. And a chariot came up and went out of Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, and an horse for 150. And so for all the kings of the Hittites and for the kings of Syria did they bring them out by their means. We have here a story largely about the Queen of Sheba, and people have no idea usually where Sheba is or what Sheba is. We believe that the area where southern Arabia almost touches Africa, there's a big triangle at the bottom part of Arabia, and another part on the African side of that strait that was basically populated by people called the Sabians. And that was where Sheba actually was. They have found a 700-foot wide dam there, and there would have been a huge lake behind it, and at one point in time, due to earthquake or something, that was breached, and the area basically became desert. But it was an area that was known for gold. It was an area that was known for spices, and it was an area that was known for having women as their rulers. All very rare things. Now, she heard the fame and about the wealth of Solomon, and so she made a trip up. This was a very common thing to do, for rulers to visit other rulers. They knew that if they showed up and the person you were dealing with was fairly rich, you'd be entertained. You would give him some of the best of your stuff, he would give you some of the best of his. It would be a fair trade. Usually you might wind up as a little better off than you went. And if you gave him lots of gold, he would tend to give you back more gold. And she basically, according to the story, was overwhelmed at just how massive what he had, and the stories hadn't been half enough. And she was absolutely awed by all he had. He gave him a great store of spices. And that all could have been. Spices were very popular, would have been traded, would have been sold, would have been used. Now, you need to understand where Solomon's wealth came from. Solomon's wealth came from his navy, which basically had sailors from Hiram, king of Tyre, who helped build the ships and man the ships. And it said they went to Ophir, and we think Ophir might have been just a general gold producing region, or could have been Sheba, could have been the Sudan, which was known as a place that produced lots of gold for Egypt. No exact idea where Ophir was, O-P-H-I-R. We do know, however, that the almug tree was a very, very, very highly prized wood, and we believe that it would now be called red sandalwood. Very heavy, very fine-grained, used for fabulous looking instruments, black on the outside, ruby red on the inside. Very nice, very, very nice. And that Hiram, king of Tyre, and Solomon had an economic arrangement for Ezion-Geber, the port at the top end of the Red Sea, to use that for trading, and they had a commercial arrangement where they split the profits. Now, we also know that a good part of Solomon's wealth came from taxing the trade routes. There were two highways that went north and south through Israel, which controlled this area. At the very far north was a place called Hatzor, and then in the middle there was one called Megiddo, which we also take as Armageddon, and then in the southern end there was a place called Gezer, and we know that each one of these places was specifically at what you would call a choke point, a place on one of those roads that everybody had to go through, and it was the ideal spot to tax whoever was traveling on the road. And they would pay in silver or gold or something else, and all of that money would go to Solomon. And so it said at one point he was getting 666 talents of gold a year. If you figured out in terms of monetary use, a number of years ago, you'd figure, well, it'd be about 20 million bucks, but in today's money, it'd be a couple $100 million a year. And just a phenomenal amount of wealth. That was his. And he was a major player. And all of a sudden then he started to get major wives, most of whom were idol worshippers. Big problem with that.